I heard the train was just train, stopped on the track. It would have been on time. It's not about the car, the train. Some parts turn around. If the other side. My pleasure. Thank you, Father. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. So it's nice to see that everyone is out tonight, and I see new faces. So we are glad to host Dr. Jeannie as part of the Penn Orthodox group today. And if you guys are interested in knowing more about what's happening, you can speak to me or Elizabeth to add you to the WhatsApp group. And we have an Instagram, I believe.
Yeah.
Does anyone check that Instagram?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
Saying Constantinou and Helen's you, but it's not really AG to whoever.
So just a little bit of introduction about Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. She holds a bachelor's degree in the religious studies and master's of arts degree in practical theology from the University of San Diego. She received a master of theology degree from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and specialized in Orthodox theology and patristics. She also received a master of theology from Harvard Divinity School, specializing in New Testament. She had also previously earned a Juris Doctor degree from Pepperdine University School of Law and has been a member of the California Bar Association. Dr. Constantinou received her PhD at the University of Laval in Quebec City in Canada in 2007 and writing her doctoral dissertation on Andrew of Caesarea and the Apocalypse in the Ancient Church of the East. Dr. Constantinou has been teaching biblical studies and early Christianity at the University of San Diego since 2002. And previously, she has taught in the New Testament at the Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology from 98 to 99. She had also led Bible studies, taught and lectured on the Bible on the Orthodoxy at parishes, conferences, retreats, and seminars for over 30 years. So all pleasure. We'd like to welcome her.
Thank you. Thank you, Mina. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. And thank you, Elizabeth, also for organizing it. If I get tired, I'll sit down, but maybe it's easier just to stand up. And yes, I did teach at Holy Cross, but I also taught at St. Cyril and Athanasius Coptic School of Theology for about 7 years. I just retired from there, so I have a lot of familiarity with the Copts. A lot of students named Mina. So many, too many to count. It's a very popular name, but I'm really happy that we're able to do a Pan-Orthodox event here. And I'm sorry that we're late. The train really did get stuck on the tracks. But let's go ahead and try to keep it informal and move things along. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I was hoping we could sit in a circle and maybe just have a discussion. But we could open the floor for discussions, and you could raise your hands and speak out, and just let's keep it really informal. So am I supposed to read the screen to read the questions? Okay, why don't you read it for me?
Before we take questions, does anyone have questions you would like to ask? Or should we start with the questions to get things rolling? Okay.
We'll start with the questions.
So,
okay, I can't read it.
Okay, so our first question, it says, in your studies of Orthodox Christian teachings, dogma, and the Bible, can women serve and be part of the priesthood order?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a really good question because that has been a very hot topic recently. As far as the priesthood, no, not if you're talking about presbyterate. The early church had female deacons. We know that, but they did not ascend beyond that. Of course, for deacons, is different than what you have in the Coptic church. Sometimes you call somebody a deacon or like a servant. We're talking about the higher order of clergy. So we did have female deacons in the early church, and this was because most of the people who were baptized were adults, and they were baptized completely naked, the way you'd baptize a baby today. And so men, the presbyters or the bishops, did not want to baptize grown naked ladies, so they would have a screen, and a deaconess would actually do the immersion, and then the priest or the bishop would pronounce the formula, the servant of God is baptized, etc. And also the female deacons had a special ministry to women and children. So over time, that office in the church sort of faded away because we had fewer and fewer adult converts, and now when we have adult converts, we don't baptize them naked. And so it kind of fell into disuse. So recently, there's been an interest and discussion about reviving the female diaconate. And I think I was initially thinking that might not be a bad idea, because many parishes could use some help. So for example, in the Orthodox tradition, only a deacon, priest, or bishop can give communion. Well, there are some parishes that have a lot of people. And maybe if there were female deacons who were, because we do have Orthodox women who are chaplains in hospitals, they cannot give communion. They'd have to call a priest. So that might be useful. The problem is, however, most of the Orthodox world is very nervous about this because of what they saw happen in the West, in the Anglican tradition, where they said, well, we're just going to let women be priests, and they came up with arguments for it. And then they said, well, first I think they were deacons, then they were priests, but they said they'll never be bishops. Well, of course, that didn't happen. That's exactly what happened. So they're concerned that our church would follow that model, that once women, Orthodox women, were deacons, they would want to be priests, and people would be clamoring for them to be priests. That's not necessarily the case, but today, unfortunately, the women who are promoting the female diaconate, many of them really do think women should be priests. That's off the table because the Orthodox don't innovate. Since the church never had female presbyters, there's really no reason to start now. So so when you talk about priesthood, priesthood can mean lower clergy in a sense, and then there's the higher clergy. If you're speaking about the presbyters, no. Orthodox women were never presbyters, and I don't think it will ever happen because it will split, it will divide the Orthodox world. So even though there's a history where you could argue that maybe the female diaconate could be revived and there could be some beneficial use of women deacons in the church, because right now, most people think that is actually, the motivation is a stepping stone to the priesthood. I think it will go nowhere, unfortunately, because, as I said, it would be nice maybe to revive the diaconate, but our people would also be concerned about, or either they would want them to become priests, or they would not understand. By the way, so your liturgy, the Coptic liturgy, is very different from the Eastern Orthodox liturgy. But there's a specific function, there's a liturgical function of the male deacon in the Orthodox liturgy. The female deacons did not have that function. Okay, they didn't stand in the liturgy and say petitions, for example. So what would happen is that even if we ordained female deacons, the congregation, because they don't know about these things, they would say, well, why isn't deaconess so-and-so standing in the liturgy saying, in peace, let us pray to the Lord? You're treating her differently than the male deacon. You see what I'm saying? But that was never their function. It wasn't that kind of sort of liturgical function. So that's, I don't know if that's a good answer or answering the question the way you expected.
I think this is amazing historical answer, but didn't answer the question.
Okay.
Yeah. All what I got from the answer is that the church does not, the Coptic church refuse innovation.
That's right.
And I'm not sure if Jesus and Christianity would have existed if women were not essential, integral part of his presence, of his service, of everything. So I think we are just I'm not just like to clarify. This is not something I study. This is not something that I want to be a reference for it. But I just want to say from my simple brain, is this just guys being nervous, having women coming into this? Who hijacked this?
That's the accusation.
Did we hijack?
Did we
Are
hijack
males
it?
hijacking
Okay.
the
What does
clergy?
it mean to be an Orthodox Christian? What makes Orthodoxy, this is the subject for tomorrow's discussion, what makes the Orthodox Church different than the West? What makes it different? That we have preserved apostolic tradition, and we don't apply human reasoning to make decisions based on what we think is right. We receive something from the Lord. This is what we received. There were no female presbyters in the early church. There were no female bishops. We know that for a fact. Now, you might say, oh, there's writings that talk about well, presbytera, that's my title. The wife of the priest was called presbytera, and the wife of the bishop was called vespotisa. But they weren't liturgical. They were not ordained to those positions. So we have to decide, who are we and what are we? Are we going to preserve our Orthodox faith? Because once you start to say, well, in my mind, we should have female deacons because women are equal to men, and isn't that what St. Paul says? There's no male nor female. Why didn't Jesus choose a woman to be among the 12? Why were there no women presbyters in the early church? Why not? Is it that Jesus had something against women? Clearly not, because as you pointed out, we have apostles who are women, right? There were women teachers and women preachers and the rest. So there's a reason. Now, I can guess as to what I think the reason is, but I don't know for sure what the reason is. You want me to guess what I think it is? Because I'm married to a priest, okay? So the priest is answerable to the parish. He's the father of the parish 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Something happens, the priest has to go. See somebody in the hospital, there's an emergency, somebody's depressed, they're suicidal, this is his life. Now imagine, of course, we have a married priesthood. Most of our priests are married, right? So what if the priest is a woman? It's a wife, and she has a little baby that's a nursing baby. Or what if she's gone? Now, you know, there have been many, until recently especially, because priests were so overwhelmed by the amount of work, they hardly ever saw their children. We had a lot of problems with priest children back in the 60s and 70s because they felt neglected by their fathers because they were gone all the time. Now, what if the mother was gone all the time? What would happen in that house? You see, there is, I think, a reason why the Lord recognized that this would not be good for families, because we have married priests. We're not like the Catholics. Now, for a Catholic, you can't make that argument because they have all celibate priests. And they could say, well, I'm just devoting my life to God. But for us, the primary reason is because this is what we receive from the apostles. That has to be good enough for us. Otherwise, we can rationalize our way to everything. And that's what's happening in the West. That's why the West is a mess. Go ahead. Did you raise your hand? No, speak into it. I can think of it. Go ahead. Would it? Do you think the Lord didn't know that was an option? I mean, we have to accept the fact that the Lord left behind a church with certain, and he told the apostles how to run the church. You think he just went up to heaven and said, bye guys, figure it out for yourselves. Whatever you decide is fine with me. We don't have a mandatory celibate priesthood. So why would we impose that on women who wanted to serve as priests? And I'll tell you something else. Women are actually more suited to the priesthood than men. You know why? Because a priest is usually a man. The priesthood is a caring profession. It takes a special kind of man to be in a position that requires a lot of sensitivity and a lot of caring. That's a caring. Now, trust me, If women were allowed to be priests, there would be no men priests. They would take over. That's true. That's true. And actually, keeping the priesthood male preserves a balance in the church. And I will tell you, I know this from what I actually saw. When I was a student in Boston, I would take classes at the Weston Jesuit School of Theology in Cambridge. It was near Harvard, but they shared a campus with the Episcopal Divinity School, and almost all of the women studying, almost all the people studying for priesthood were women, okay, because of the changes that happened. And guess what? They were very militant feminists, okay? They had no use for men. And now the women have really taken over, and it's different. There's a change in the Anglican Church tremendously. Once you open the door and say, well, we think we know better than Jesus, so we're going to ordain women too, then you open the door, well, why don't we ordain this kind of person? What about this kind of person? What about this kind of person? You see what I'm trying to say? We don't always understand why the Lord chose to give us a church and have these sort of structures for the church, but we have to trust that he knew what he was doing. So, yes, Father.
Just to clarify that everybody understand your answer, including myself, while also manifesting the Orthodox or the Coptic Orthodox view in that matter, what you said is from the beginning, when Jesus appointed his apostle, they were only from the male side, if I use that term.
Well, among the 12, only the 12 were women,
yes. And the priesthood is based on our Orthodox view, or the Coptic Orthodox view. The title priest is also a manifestation of God fatherhood. And in that case, it's a father. If we go even way to Melchizedek from the beginning, through Aaron and through everything, it was never the case that God chose a woman for that pastoral or priestly role. At the same time, I think the confusion or the agony or maybe the issue is translating that into gender inequality or putting or belittling women.
Yes.
In fact, in our Coptic church, women, they play an amazing role in the service. Even in the Bible, St. Paul used so many women to carry messages to churches. And I think that's what you meant when you mentioned the word apostle. Well, in that case, I guess.
Okay, so the term apostle, we know, in the early church was not confined just to the 12.
Yes.
Anybody who was an eyewitness to the resurrection of Christ was an apostle, including women.
Yeah.
So, but what has happened is, especially
maybe you meant the word disciple, not apostle, because in St. Paul's epistle, he said that God appointed in the church first apostles. That's the 12. Then he appointed 72 disciples.
But Paul doesn't talk about that. No. We call the 72 the apostles.
The apostles as well, yes.
And Paul mentions a married couple who are his relatives, and he calls them apostles.
In that case, we need to define the word apostle.
Well, what happened is the word apostle came to mean and means today the 12.
Yes, and today in our Orthodox Church, the apostle in that case are the 12 and
the
so
leading
forth.
authorities.
Absolutely, just to make sure that everybody understands. In our church, Saint Mary, who is in fact the highest rank, even above the heaven,
than the angels.
Yes, she was not a priest.
That's right.
But she did not feel, or the church never felt that she was belittled. I think that's the point.
No, I think that's a very good point. That in the Orthodox Church, traditionally, women have not felt like they were not equal to men.
Absolutely.
This is a worldly way of thinking.
Absolutely.
And this is not something that we accept. Now, women, Orthodox women traditionally, and still today, I don't think they're really clamoring for the priesthood. And one reason is because actually we can do everything. First of all, because authority in the church, even though we have hierarchs, we have priests, we have bishops, we don't get the sense that there is something being imposed upon us from the top, the way Catholics do. There's a very strong sense of hierarchy in the Catholic Church. Everything comes from Rome, the Pope and the Magisterium. They tell you what to do, and that's what you do. And in Orthodoxy, we don't look at the priest as a person of power.
Absolutely.
We really see the priest as the servant. And so you don't have that sense that you have in the West, where women were being deprived somehow of power or authority.
Yes, in fact, it's the opposite, because in our Orthodox Church, we follow the Bible to the letter, and Jesus said that whoever thinks among you that he is first, let him be
Be
last.
the last.
And that's
And
how
the
we
priests sometimes are the worst treated people in the parish.
Yeah.
Father, I don't know if you've had that experience,
All
but
the time.
a lot of us
feel.
have.
All the time.
So, we kiss his hand on the one hand, and then we give him a kick in the rear end.
Just
On the other hand, that's the
wanted
reality.
to make sure
Let's
that
be
what you
honest.
said is understood, because sometimes it might be confusing. But I really thank you for that lovely answer.
Thank you, Father, for the clarification.
And-
So I think it's because what are people, when we approach these things in a worldly sense, we're going to have these worldly analytical answers. Well, women are equal to men, so therefore, and the women have been oppressed, and that's why the church never. Jesus was not the oppressor of women. Jesus was the liberator of women. And people say, well, he wouldn't have picked a woman to be a leader because of, are you kidding me? He touched lepers and dead people and spoke to Samaritans. He was not concerned about the culture. So if he really thought it was appropriate to have a woman among the 12 or to have women presbyters, we would have them today. So we just have to trust the Lord. And I will say one last thing, and then we'll stop with this discussion, because the whole thing is not about that. There is nothing a woman cannot do. You can tell me if I'm wrong about this, Father. If in the Coptic church, there's nothing a woman cannot do in the church other than to become a priest or a bishop, which means everything else, that most of the work that happens in the church is not the sacraments. There is teaching, there is preaching, there is visiting the sick, there is, all lots of different kinds of ministries that are open to women. Most of the work of the church does not just take place at the divine liturgy on Sunday with the priest as the head. So women should not think that, oh, I can't be a priest, therefore I cannot serve the church. There is a lot that women can do with their talents. And they're really limited to just not doing the actual sacraments. So you have to look at it that way too. Am I right about that, Father? Okay, he said yes. All right, let's move on to the next question. Yes, go ahead. Elizabeth is, okay.
I was just going to say, when it comes to reading our Bibles or reading the Holy Fathers, how can we kind of get into that? How do we prepare ourselves? Are we to interpret it and then ask questions? Are we to read the Holy Fathers along with the Bible and kind of do that hand in hand? What do you think?
How do we do that? I think it's okay for you to read the Bible and just read it. I don't think you have to be trying to interpret, because most things are very straightforward. If you come across something that you're not sure about, you can look to see what the fathers say, but sometimes it's not easy to access those writings. Or sometimes look, when the fathers talked about, let's say, the Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel of John, they didn't answer absolutely every question. They were giving a sermon, and they would discuss certain points that came to their mind at the time. So I would encourage you that if you have a question, you're not sure about something, talk to your priests about it. Ask them about it. Don't come to your own conclusion. Well, here, Father, it says, thou shalt have no graven images. So what are these things here, Obviously, you wouldn't do that. But sometimes we have questions and we don't know the answers. So you can read the fathers. That's great, but you don't have to. You can just read the Bible and find favorite verses and write them down and memorize them. If you stick to the New Testament, you'll find it much easier. I wouldn't suggest venturing into the Old Testament. That's difficult. That has a lot of thorny issues. But the Psalms and the New Testament are very good. Yes. Mm-hmm.
But they ask why can't I come to your church and take communion? And why can't it sounds bad, why can't I fit in? And I didn't really have a clear answer of the main difference between the churches and why. I thought that I knew my religion enough, but I guess I didn't. So
well, no, that's okay. Listen, I want you to understand that we're not born knowing these things. That's why you're here, right? To learn, to have answers for yourself and for others who ask you. it's okay. You don't have to know everything. But it's great as an opportunity for you to find out. Okay, so you can say, well, why don't we practice intercommunion? We don't even have it yet between the Copts and the Eastern Orthodox. We're waiting for that day, and that'll probably take a couple hundred years before they finally come together. The church moves very slowly, okay? So why don't we practice intercommunion? Because we don't share the same faith, okay? I'm not talking about the Eastern Orthodox and the Copts, but a Protestant. For them, it's just a symbol. They don't think of it as the holy body and precious blood of the Lord. Doesn't have that meaning for them. So in the early church, and this is what you could tell them, always fall back on the early church. Don't try to have a debate over the Bible, okay? Go back to, what did the early church do? Did they give communion to just anybody? No. And not only that, not only did you have to be baptized, the services were secret. People didn't know there were all kinds of rumors among the Romans. Oh, we hear they're cannibals because they talk about the body and blood. I'm serious. They thought the early Christians were cannibals. Everything was a secret. Why? Because it's sacred. And if they don't share that faith that we have, if they don't recognize it as the body and blood of Christ, they shouldn't receive it. Every time we receive it, it's not always for our sanctification. It could be for our condemnation. If we ourselves have committed a grave sin and we haven't gone to confession, we shouldn't receive. Because that's what we pray, that it be received for our benefit, for our sanctification. So for that person, it would not be for their benefit. But I don't know that they would understand that. But you'd have to say, we do everything according to what the early church did. We haven't changed. That's a good way to tell them why we're different. And in the early church, they did not practice intercommunion. There was no such. But they said, well, I'm a Christian. Yeah, that's great. That's great that you're a Christian. But communion was restricted to people who belonged or were baptized into the church. There were heresies back then too. They didn't intercommune with heretics, okay? That might help. Always go back to that early church, early church, early church. People will understand that. Yes. Anybody else? You have another question? Okay.
Going back to that, reasonable thinking.
Yes, rational thinking.
Rational thinking.
Yes.
Just how, when we get into that, starting to just rationalize things and kind of go from that worldly perspective, how can we get back to the Christ-like thinking?
That's a very good question. Well, one way that first of all, we're always tempted to think like the world because we're surrounded, especially in our age. When you have social media, you're watching TV, and certain ideas are being promoted and they're being normalized. Sin is totally being normalized. You know, how many couples today live together before they get married? Even couples in the church are doing that. So this has totally been normalized. It used to be a very shameful thing. And now, everybody does it. There's nothing wrong with it. And we kind of get complacent. So we have to ask ourselves, is this what Christ stood for? Would Christ agree with this? And then don't come up with reasons for why it's okay, even though Jesus wouldn't have agreed with it. What did the early church teach? So how do we shape that? We shape it through our prayers, through the Bible reading, through coming to church, but we're constantly having to remind ourselves that this is not right because we ingest it. You know, you might watch something and say, that doesn't affect me. I can watch this movie that has the F word 100 times. It doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. You can't unhear it. And when you see immoral things, you can't unsee them. It does affect us. Otherwise, people wouldn't spend billions of dollars on advertising. We think it doesn't affect us, but it does. It shapes our soul in a way that we don't even recognize. So we have to guard ourselves against the wrong kinds of influences. That's very important. Keep your mind pure. Keep your body pure. Sanctify that because Christ died for you to sanctify you. So it's very important that we take that seriously. And it's an ongoing process of shaping that mindset, And it's something that we have to guard, because very easily we can be taken away. By the way, the devil doesn't do it. If you're already coming to church, which I'm assuming you all are, the devil doesn't try to tempt you away with something obvious. He tries to tempt you away with something that seems not so terrible or harmless. And then step by step by step, before you know it, you're not even coming to church anymore. Okay? That's how it works. So that's why we have to be on guard for his wiles. Yes. You can just, I'll go ahead.
Well, because like you were saying, it's like normalized and glorified in some ways, like sin. So it seems like any kind of seemingly like The Office, let's say, a show that's pretty harmless,
Yes.
enjoyable. Like
Yes.
I've watched episodes where I thought, oh, did they just say that, or oh, did I just like that's like how do you find like I always think about need to be and just kind of trying to be aware of okay, that's not really what I want to focus on. I want to do something good. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just like, how do you kind of live in the world?
Yes, how, that's
where
a,
nothing is really pure.
that's right. Yes, yeah, I know, right. But no, this is a very good point. What is acceptable? Because some things are worse than others. And it's, we almost can't avoid it. So, what can I say? I think when it's too much, and you should not. If you say, you know what, I'm going to turn it off. I'm not going to watch this, or I know what you're saying. It's all around us, and we do ingest it to a certain extent, but we have to be on guard against that. And also, if you're starting to think that it might be affecting you, and in your prayers, if you're remembering these images that you've seen or these words that you've heard, that's definitely why you have to be careful. So no, we don't sit in our room all day and read the Bible or just watch, they said, the G-rated movies or whatever. There's hardly anything you can see anymore. Even for little kids, the content, the sexual sort of allusions to things, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So, no, we're not going to go live in a hole. But at the same time, we also don't want to pretend that it doesn't matter. So let's just be careful. Be careful.
Be fishermen of people. And
Jesus, put it up to your...
Jesus asked his disciples to be fishermen of people. And we are Jesus' stewards here. We're all serving, most of us.
Yes.
And we are expected to be fishermen as well.
Fishers.
I once heard the analogy that we're fishing in a fish tank, teaching ourselves.
Okay.
Because we don't go outside. How do you see like us as a church, as an Orthodox church, in relation to the ministry, to the outside world?
That's a very good question. Yes, he said for us to be fishers of men. And I think that Orthodoxy has not done a very good job of that necessarily. I think we're learning that we need to do more of the outreach to the people outside, especially in the neighborhood, if we have a church in a neighborhood. So some churches are doing more of that. Part of the reason for that has been historical circumstances. How could you in Egypt go fishing? You get your heads cut off. So part of it is that reality. And the same, it's not just Egypt, but Greece. My grandparents were all born as members of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, they were trying to survive. So we're just coming out of that mentality that we need to take care of our own. But I'm not so sure that we don't want to focus all on the outside, because a lot of our people are as though they are unchurched. They don't know very much about the faith. So we first need to convert our own people too. There's nothing wrong with that. So I do think that we need to do more, but I think that that's happening slowly. And but somebody asked me once to give them a reaction to sort of the mission statement of an Orthodox group that wanted to really promote evangelization. And it was something like, we have made our churches, we're spending all our money on our churches and on the buildings, but the parish is not your parish. The world is your parish. And I said, that's not Orthodox. The world is not our parish is the parish. And we try to bring people to Christ, to the parish. So we always have to bear in mind, what are we doing when we go out? And who's called to do that? There's a sense that you have to win souls for Jesus. That's a Protestant thing. Now, why is that also the emphasis? Why aren't the Orthodox going out saying, come to the church, we got to save your soul, right? Because Protestants will say, if you don't believe the way I believe, if you haven't been saved the way I've been saved, because I said the sinner's prayer and I took Jesus into my heart, and I was on this date, January 25th, 1982, I became a Christian. If you don't do that, you're not saved. So we don't go out and say to people, listen, you're not saved. You need to be saved. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's a pride in that that's contrary to our way of doing things. We open up the church. We can just have a sign out here, Coptic Church, open to all. Come and visit. Pass out leaflets. Would you like to go? Or just invite your friends. Oh, because it's very interesting, the worship of the Coptic Church. Would you like to see what the worship of the ancient church was like? Why don't you just come and visit? We are the Church of Alexandria. We were founded by St. Mark, in the year whatever, 50-something. Come and visit. See what the early church was like. That's how we do it. We don't do it because we have to save them, because that suggests we have it made. You see what I'm trying to say? It's a different attitude, a very different attitude. So let's not take as our models Western models of thinking, including that. Okay, next. Yes, sir.
And it's said that like going to the gym or bodybuilding is like a sin because you sculpt your body and you make it look good. And
Going to a gym and doing bodybuilding is a sin.
because like you sculpt
You're
it, like
sculpting it. You're trying to. Look. I don't have a particular opinion about this. In the church, there's nothing wrong with a healthy lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with. Actually, this is kind of a Greek ideal of the physical form, but as long as it doesn't become vanity. You're proud of yourself because of your muscles, okay? Because that is not going to help you in the kingdom of heaven. So with everything in the church, we try to achieve a balance. If people do enjoy working out and seeing the results, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we remember that that body is destined for the grave and that the soul is what we need to be looking out for more now. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So orthodoxy is never extreme. It should be a balance. I wouldn't say that that alone is a sin.
I was gonna ask like why are tattoos so looked down upon, but just answer that question then. So
Well, because the body is supposed to be is sacred. So tattoos, yeah, that's something in the Bible specifically. But I know a lot of cops have tattoos on their wrist, right? Cops do, don't they? Yeah, that's a kind of a tradition. But in the Bible, it says it's against tattoos, defacing the body. But I think there's a difference between and having a lot. But that's not for me to say. That's judgmental. So you're covering your arm there. That's okay. What's on your arm? What's the image on your arm? What's the image? Yeah. But sometimes people put religious things on there. We had a parishioner, and she had the icon of Christ here and the Virgin Mary here, just like, you can see it over there. It was a half sleeve. It was pretty elaborate. But, you're asking somebody from the wrong generation. I'm definitely not into that. I don't understand it myself. That's my. They see it as a beautification of the body.
If you're doing this, you make your body. That's different. But it's in the eyes of one thing, the action, and it's like using stuff, like you can use stuff to kill somebody, to fish, to do this. It's what you do with it. So I just don't want it to be. I don't want it to be a blanket that this is defacing the body or this is doing this. It's
I
our understanding.
don't, I've never spent much time thinking about it, but I know it's very popular right now. I know that the Bible, the Old Testament, specifically forbids tattoos. And if you're Jewish, a lot of Jewish cemeteries won't bury you if you have a tattoo.
What was the tattoos in the Old Testament?
They had tattoos in the Old Testament.
What was it about? What is the tattoo? Because the tattoo is
Because
different.
you are the image of God. Okay? And so when you deface the body, especially in a permanent way, like
but
that,
this is not defacing. You are
it's considered.
beautifying it.
Well, but that's like you said, it's in the.
I surrender. I surrender. I surrender. But
I'm not arguing with you.
you're-
I have no theological. I've never looked to see what the fathers
I think
say.
our generation is
but I
missing
think
out.
it's-
But
it's-
I
it's-
agree
it's-
with you.
I'm not arguing with you. You can hold your opinion. I don't think that's to make the difference between whether we have eternal life or not, because I don't think it's that serious of a sin. So we have to again have balance. Father, do you have an opinion about tattoos?
Well, it is not an opinion, actually. In our
Okay.
Catholic Church, especially in the bishopric from Mississauga all the way to Vancouver under Andamina's guidance, we held a clergy meeting to discuss so that our opinion should be the same across
That's very
the
good.
bishopric. So
And what did the clergy discuss, Father?
the clergy agreed that it's an ambiguous area. So basically, are we supposed to say yes or no? So we agreed that when it comes to the tattoo question in particular, we say the tattoo that we allow is a small cross in your right breast or your right arm. And that's the answer you're going to hear in every single Coptic church from Mississauga to Vancouver. Does it have to do with like the Old Testament command? We respect the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Does it have other meaning? You know what? Let us, like, it's an ambiguous area. So that's the answer we agreed to give as clergy. Obviously, people
it's an
went.
So the
went-
answer would be an individual one for the spiritual father
Yeah, and
to
basically,
address.
people will go to different extreme and say
Yes.
it's branding of the body, and that's used to be satanic. And sure, there are some people who did that research, and other people say, well, but I do it for like the Navy SEAL. And so, because it's a very ambiguous,
Yes.
we came up with that answer, which
Thank you,
is
Father.
what we do in
Thank
our
you,
Coptic
Father.
Church.
Well, I think that's the right answer, and it would depend. So you're saying it's not a defacement. Have you seen people who tattoo their face and their neck and everything? They're covered. At a certain point, you have to, yeah, but the point is, well, goes back to what I was saying before. It's a question of balance. We don't say it's a sin, absolutely. So if you get a whole sleeve, and then the next time your spiritual father sees you with another sleeve, and then you start to do your legs, he might say, what's going on? And maybe there's something within you that is I'm not saying you, but somebody that's compelling them to do this, and there might be a spiritual issue. Okay, so very good. Thank you. Who else? Okay, up here, I guess, we have Elizabeth, and next door. Go ahead. Yes.
Hi. So I'm a relatively recent Protestant convert. I think a bunch of us are here too. So I kind of wanted to bring in like the context of your book about I'm losing the word now, the Greek word.
Phronema?
The phronema. So what are maybe some like harmful Protestant phronema that you see a pattern of in recent converts, and maybe ways we can address it?
It's the desire to analyze everything and place it in some kind of a structure, a logical structure, so that you can explain it. That's very common, especially among people who come out of the Calvinist tradition. They believe that everything has to fit into a certain conceptual structure and make sense according to their reasoning. And they chase their tails trying to make it make sense. So that's just a general Western way of thinking, which requires or demands a logical answer to everything. And that's very hard to just get rid of. It takes a long time before you say, well, I don't understand it, but I accept it. So people ask all kinds of questions that really can't be answered because they're a mystery, but they want the answer. And so that's really the only thing. I can't think of any specific one. It's just this sort of nagging feeling that I got to read more, I got to know more, and somehow I'll come up with the answer. I'll come up with a perfect explanation for this. And so people really, 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 really read, And they're searching for something that they think is going to be an answer. And that can be destructive. That's also the devil getting you to try to chase your tail and focus on things that aren't spiritually helpful. So I'll give you an example of something that happened in an email correspondence I had with a fellow who wrote to me once, and this was about the Bible. It's not an easy topic. It's in the Old Testament when Joshua was told, when they entered the land of Canaan, to kill the Canaanites. And it's a terrible thing, and we're all very uncomfortable with it. So I addressed it, of course, in my discussion of the book of Joshua. Nobody's happy about it. Nobody feels good about it. But this is what the Lord did, because the Lord was bringing judgment on the Canaanites because they were extremely perverse. They were sacrificing their own children to the gods, okay? So he used the Israelites to bring judgment on the Canaanites. Now, when the Israelites misbehaved, he used the Canaanites and he punished the Israelites. So God wasn't showing favorites. But this fellow didn't like my answer because he said, I can't accept the fact that God committed genocide, killing all the Canaanites. I said, well, first of all, he didn't commit genocide, because genocide is when you kill a person for who they are. And we didn't tell that they weren't killed for who they are, but for the way they behaved. Okay, that's one thing. So he says, yeah, but I think Joshua misunderstood the Lord. And that's what happened. So the Bible has Joshua's misunderstanding. And I'm like, do you see the problem there? So every time there's something we don't like in the Bible, we're going to say, oh, the author misunderstood what God meant. I know better, so I'm going to substitute my idea because I've decided that the biblical author didn't really understand God. That's a big problem. And I said, why are you so, interested in this subject? He says, I have to explain it to my daughter. I said, okay, how old is your daughter? 3. Well, he's trying to he feels like he has to justify and come up with some logical explanation for everything. You can't do that. You just have to say, do we trust God? Do we believe that God knows what he's doing? Do we, because when we say this is bad, what God did was bad, we're judging God. Do we want to be in a position to judge God? So this is my point. We have to be very careful not to think that somehow, if I just think about it hard enough, I'll come up with a perfect rational explanation for why we do this or that. See what I mean? Do you find yourself falling into that sometimes? Yeah. Overthinking everything?
It's kind of what led me to the Orthodox Church first. It's like reading, research, wanting to know
yes,
more,
which is great.
And it brought me here. So,
but now, and it's okay to read, it's okay to research, but then you have to know when it's time to shut off your mind and just be in the presence of God, because knowledge does not mean we will be saved. We have a lot of fancy theologians who are very far from God, and Bible scholars and everything else. So knowledge is not salvation. It's how we use that to shape our soul. Yes, somebody had a question down here. Anybody? Okay, Elizabeth, it's back to you.
Okay.
It's a very quiet side of the room. You're very introspective, very contemplative.
I was just thinking when we're talking about like Protestant interpretations and things, I just had recently, and I'd never thought about it, but some Protestant thinkers or maybe people that don't get baptized were saying, well, the thief on the right was just was taken to heaven, no baptism, no works had to be done. And I was thinking, I'm like, how would I explain that? I feel like I didn't have the right knowledge. I was like, if someone asked me this, I'd be like, I don't know.
And Orthodox people don't ask that question. Why not? You see, that's a different question. Because we're not analyzing the situation, looking for excuses for why we don't have to do something. So what's happened is people say, well, I don't have to be baptized. The thief on the cross wasn't baptized, and he got into heaven. Therefore, I do not have to be baptized. So, I heard the story of the thief on the cross, of course, as all of us have, gazillion times, and it never occurred to me to ask that question. Why was I even baptized when he wasn't baptized? You see, when people raise these objections, it's because they do not want to conform themselves to what the church says we must do. Okay? That's what it is. It's all about an excuse. Well, what about so-and-so? What about the Chinese? Are they going to be saved? What if they never heard of Jesus? You know what? Let God worry about the Chinese. That's a distraction from the devil. I don't mean to be calling up the devil so often, but you have to understand that that is put into your mind as a reason not to do something. I don't need to go to confession. I can just kneel in front of the icon and confess to Jesus, right? Who gives you this idea? When Christ gave the authority to forgive sins to the 12, who gives you that idea? Only the evil one. You have to be smart about it. You have to recognize that it is the evil one. He is your enemy. So whenever people come up with these excuses, that's fine. The Lord, he couldn't get baptized, right? We have had people who died before baptism, and they're still saints, right? Because they had this intention. He couldn't get baptized. So what is Jesus going to say? Too bad for you, buddy. You weren't baptized, so, can't let you in. Seriously. So we have to be recognized. But that's different than when we have the opportunity to be baptized, and we have chosen out of our own pride and because we've invented our own reasons for why we don't have to be baptized, that we don't. That's a very different attitude than the humility of the thief. You see? So there you go. Yes?
I was going to just add to that.
Okay.
And to bring to add on that topic, I know I came from a Western mindset. I was trying to rationalize it. But on the topic of the thief on the right, Archbishop Gregorius of blessed memory of Thyatira, he once said, he was answering a question for someone, he said, some are baptized with water, some are baptized with their own blood.
Yes.
And that, to me, was...
There were martyrs. Yeah, those are called red martyrs in the life of the church.
I've not heard that term.
Yes. So a white martyr is somebody who's baptized, but a red martyr is somebody who's baptized in their blood. That is a term. We don't hear this too much, but yeah.
And I think that's something that sort of those that are coming from the Western mindset should hear.
Yes, but they would say, but he wasn't dying for Christ. He was crucified because he was a thief. So they would come up with some other reason, right? So we have to be careful not to always be coming up with excuses and rationales for why we believe something or shouldn't do something. Or we have to really respect the tradition of the church, because this is why we are different. I can't emphasize that enough. The Catholic Church is in complete disarray. Protestant churches, there's tens of thousands of them, and they all think they're right in what they believe. And why are we so unified? Because we have preserved apostolic tradition. Once you decide you know better than what the church has been saying for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, this is when we will begin to fall apart. Yes.
لا تقادر يا أخ علي. This is in Arabic an expression that the Islamists, radical Islamists in the Middle East, used to shush somebody from thinking. If you question the leader
Yes.
of ISIS
Yes,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
leader of whatever,
Yes.
they
will.
demand you that you do not argue and you don't
Yes.
ask.
I'm
I
not
want-
saying that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I'm clarifying this. I just want to be very clear here that you will be held accountable for your actions, your decisions. You are the image of God. You have a brain. You have your resources from the church.
That's right.
You have every single aid that
You need.
is available for you to grow in the spirit.
Yes.
But you still have to make up your mind at the end of the day. And while you're making up your mind, you have to keep your humility and humble yourself before the Lord and say, my brain cannot process certain things that are way higher than me, but that will never take away your right to ask the question. I have a long list of questions from Tia, which is my youngest daughter. When she asks me things, I say, you know what? We'll add it to the list of questions that we'll ask Jesus when we meet him, because I don't have any explanation for this. So keeping the faith in what we are taking does not give you the right to be blind and follow without thinking, because if we do so, wrong leaders are going to take you where you don't want to be. So at the end of the day, you will be asked for your actions. So what I'm hearing from you is very clear. You have the resources, you have the history. We know that this path have taken our parents and grandparents to eternal life. Let's not venture into different pathways.
Yeah, the church makes saints. We know how the church makes saints because the way we live is the way of life we received from the apostles. So we hold on to this. So of course we should ask questions. I've got all kinds of questions of my own, and I'm not waiting until I meet Jesus. Although some of them will have to wait. I think by the time we see Jesus, if we're allowed to, we won't care about that. Okay? But I wouldn't just wait for that. Why don't you see if you can find out the answers for your daughter and learn about your faith? Definitely more knowledge is better, but knowledge does not substitute for the purity of our soul and our spiritual life. That's not enough, and that's what I was
One more
trying to
point,
say.
and I'm really going to let Ian. When you say, this is your church, follow up. If we ask youngsters to stop thinking, they will walk away.
I didn't say that.
Okay. So that's good.
When did
That's
I
good.
say that? I said
Are
that
we allowed to ask
questions? I did not say not to ask questions. I did not say not to think. That's ridiculous.
Okay.
I'm a lawyer. You think I've analyzed all this myself?
Okay.
Okay. I've never said that.
Good.
I said there are things that we cannot explain with the rational mind. Okay, and we shouldn't spend time trying to come up with some reasons for why some rational explanation, or use our rational mind to do something different in the church. We're all born knowing nothing, and we all learn along the way, some of us more than others. Now, everybody doesn't have to be a theologian to be saved.
I love what I'm
Okay?
hearing from you.
But
Yeah.
I never said not to ask questions, especially in this culture. Because if you say don't ask questions, you're implying that the church has no answers. The church does have answers, but they are not answers that the world gives. Okay? When the church does not want to ordain, let's say, or marry two people of the same gender, the answer is not the answer of the world, it's the answer of the church, but there is an answer. Do you understand what I'm saying? The question is, are we willing to accept it? And sometimes the answers are not something that we can comprehend. This is why the saints are so important. Sometimes you have to, in order to understand things, you have to leave the rational mind behind and enter into an experience of prayer. But there again, it's very tricky because somebody might say, well, I had a revelation of Christ when I was praying and he told me this. So you see, it's very difficult. But I never said don't ask questions. God forbid. Yes? Okay, fine. No, that's
Because
okay, Father.
We are a mixed group, and I always like to make sure that everybody understands, firstly, what we are saying, secondly, what the Coptic Church is saying. But because what you are saying is exactly what the Coptic Church is saying.
I know that's why we recognize each other's orthodoxy.
Absolutely.
That's why we know that it was a mistake to be divided
Absolutely.
so long ago.
So what you are saying is, number one, there are matters that no matter how much we grow in knowledge, our mind will always remain limited because
That's
we are
right.
talking about the divine God
That's
who is
right.
unlimited.
That's right.
Number two, there is a revelation in the Bible that God himself revealed himself to us, and that's why Jesus is the Logos. Logos means the knowledge, and the second person, all of that. Without going there, there are things that Jesus revealed. These things we take by faith. And we are like, we thank God for that revelation. Number three, which is, I agree with you and I agree with Dr. Ala, that everybody has the right to reason. God himself said, let us reason, let us talk. Jesus, while he was sending the disciples, sometimes he will be intriguing them to ask the question. Like, for example,
Yes.
when he brought them and said, who do people say that I am? They did not ask them, but he intrigued them. So, meaning, nothing is wrong with asking the question, but we have to respect.
Understand the limitations
Absolutely.
of human reasoning. In the prayers of the Eastern Church, I would not be surprised if you have the same statement. that we are called the reason-endowed sheep of Christ.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay?
Yes.
So that's where we are supposed to use our reason, but in the proper way,
Absolutely.
not to reimagine what we think the church ought to be doing that it is not doing, or try to spend a lot of time trying to come up with rational explanations.
One last tiny remark. Actually, the church has always opened the door for question, even for the heresies, and the church responded to that to the point that St. Augustine, for example, would say, you know what? We thank God for the heresies because their question intrigued us to go and search and learn more about our
Well,
faith.
here's how we know that the church never forbade questions. From the beginning, if somebody wanted to be a Christian, they had to be catechized. So we cannot say that the church is not for information or knowledge. Catechism was the basis all the time. And in Alexandria, when people, after the Severan persecution, Origen is going around the city teaching people secretly. Sometimes at the risk of his own life, people were catechized. So the church has always believed in education, never forbade the asking of questions. But we have to remember that there's a limitation to what we can understand with our rational mind. That's all I'm saying. Yes. Why can't we have communion in the Orthodox Church? Right now, because we are in schism, the Oriental Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox, we do not, intercommune. There has been a recognition in the past few decades that actually we share the same faith, that the schism that occurred really was a misunderstanding of how we express our beliefs about Jesus Christ. We have recognized that that's the case, but there's no mechanism in Orthodoxy to say, okay, we're all one church now, let's just start intercommuning. We have to come to an agreement. And there are still some Oriental Orthodox who think that we are heretics, and there are some Eastern Orthodox who probably think that you are heretics. We haven't come to a consensus within the church. And we don't have a pope. Well, I don't mean like the Pope of Alexandria. I mean one bishop in charge of the whole church, like the Catholics do. If this was a Catholic situation, he'd just say, schism is over, that's it, we're all one. We don't have that mechanism. So we have to allow the schism to be healed very gradually, because when it happened because of the Council of Chalcedon, you know, right? Which was 451. 451, some of the Orthodox did not accept the decision of the council, but they didn't say, that's it, we're breaking off. For a long time, there were Chalcedonian bishops and non-Chalcedonian bishops while the church tried to work it out. But about 100 years after Chalcedon, we had an actual schism where somebody ordained a non-Chalcedonian bishop in a city where there was already a Chalcedonian bishop. That's a mark of schism. So it took 100 years before there was actually a schism. So it might take us over 100 years or more to reverse that. And this kind of thing is exactly what will accomplish that. But we can't, as Orthodox Christians, we don't say, well, I think there's no difference. I'm just going to take communion in the Coptic Church. We don't make those decisions for ourselves. It's something that will happen in time through the consensus of the church. I really believe it. I don't think I'll live to see it. But you know why? That's a good thing. It's good that the church moves very slowly so that we are all in agreement. And that will happen. But people are still learning, because what happened is that the Oriental Orthodox were called Monophysites by the Chalcedonians, meaning that you believe that I was taught this growing up, that Christ is divine only. You didn't believe that Christ had a human nature. Well, there was a heresy called Monophysites, okay? And you guys were saying we're Nestorians. We talked about the two natures of Christ. So because there were actual heresies that taught those things, it's going to take a while before everybody realizes that what we teach and what you teach is neither of those things. And we're teaching the same thing about Jesus Christ. Father wanted to jump in here. Please, Father, go ahead. No, that's okay, Father. Don't apologize. I'm interested in your opinion.
It's exactly what you said with one sentence only, because the schism took place in a canonical council. The only problem or the only way we can take it off is economical council. Like
Yes.
if something happened in a Supreme Court, you cannot just go to a local court and wipe it.
Yes, but the schism wasn't created by an ecumenical
No, no,
council. So I think it can be healed without an ecumenical.
No.
We'll never have an ecumenical.
Healing is something going back to communion.
Yes, that's how it will
fulfill-
be healed.
Yes,
That-
absolutely.
With the intercommunion, but it'll take a little bit of time. It's going to happen very imperceptibly. This didn't occur 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We didn't have joint Orthodox meetings, but I was surprised. I'm teaching in a Coptic school for so many years. I never thought that that would happen.
In
So we learn about each other.
In our liturgy, we have a litany that we says, "Let the schism of the church cease." Every single liturgy.
That's
because
wonderful.
We loved to bring us to
That-
unity,
and we will. I
but
believe we will.
definitely. we
But
take
it's
time
not up to us as individuals to make that
No,
happen.
it's
I think it will happen
about-
with the bishops.
on above
Yes, over
level,
time.
yes.
Yes, go ahead, and then over you.
I am a first generation Canadian, so it's that I came to Canada kind of with still like my old kind of beliefs
Yes.
and everything, right? But for the next generation, if they grew their whole life in Canada, they're gonna think all this like new Western ideology is
Yes.
normalized. So how do we kind of let them know that this is not what we believe in, but not to force it on them, because if you force it on someone, it's not gonna work out.
Right, that's very important, because I think that in Egypt, because you were such a minority there and a minority under pressure and threat, you really supported each other. And here you are, just a small group within a very big country with a lot of different ideas, and the threat of losing your orthodoxy is not so obvious. And so we have to be bringing, when you get married, you bring your children to the church and let them understand what it is to be Orthodox, and that they're Coptic Orthodox not because they're Egyptian, but because you're following the apostolic faith, and talk to them about it. They won't remain Coptic Orthodox just by coming to church for a couple hours a week. You have to live that in your house. And if you do, they will love their Coptic faith. But if we just figure that and you have to talk about it. You have to talk about what's different in the culture. Why don't we practice intercommunion? Why don't we do this? Why don't we? And so that they understand what it is. That's the only way. It's a challenge because we are a minority. In Canada and in the United States, we're a tiny minority. Up at this side, there must be a question you want to ask. Yes?
Talk about the converts and how what they're thinking could be coming in. What about those who were born in our faith,
Same.
and how do we get lost, or how do we lose our love or our passion for what we were doing?
That's a
and
really
how do we
good,
get it
I
back?
think that's a harder thing. I think that's a more common thing. How do we almost not appreciate or even understand what we have? Because it's normal for us. So the converts are searching and searching and searching, and they find the Orthodox faith, and we're like, yeah, okay, we don't really understand what the big deal is. So I think that we should learn about our faith so that we understand what we're talking about. Why is it different? Why is it the truth? What do we have that, because it's like you grow up with an antique that's really valuable. It's like your dining room table, and you eat dinner on it every night. You have no idea how, it's a $500,000 table from the time of King Arthur or something like that. You have no idea because it's just your table. So we have to be very careful not to become complacent. We have to pick up the cover and say, oh, wow, that's an amazing table, and learn about our faith, because when we do, we become the converts. I became a convert to my faith because I grew up, I never thought of being anything else, never wanted to be anything else, but I didn't really know my faith. And once I did, I was blown away by the depth of it. So Elizabeth's agreeing. You have a similar experience?
When I turned 18, I was like, okay, we got people coming to the church, and they're just full of this love for it. I'm like, well, what the heck? How come I'm not
Excited
with the
about
same
it,
thing?
yeah.
So then I started going deeper and deeper, and just like I had this really deep love for Orthodoxy, and we drive by St. Mark's every day because I live like a couple blocks away, and I'm just like, what are Coptic Orthodox? And my dad's like, oh, the Egyptians. And they used to come to our church right when, when they came from Egypt, and there was no Coptic churches. They were with us. And, I was like, oh, that'd be so interesting just to talk to them. I mean, the Orthodox is in the name, but how come we never see each other? And I just came in one day, and it was just like, so much of Christ's love was here. And I was like, I can't just walk away. I have to get to know these people. So
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
so yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I think I know you're waiting for dinner, so I don't want to keep you much longer. Last question. A comment, can you make it real quick? Because they're hungry.
Yeah, this is not for individuals, this is for higher up. I just want everyone here from the youth.
I'm saying to decide about intercommunion.
Yeah, this is higher up, but
That's not
for
for
things
us.
to happen, I just want every one of you to know that in the society, don't wait for leadership to do things. You are it. And when you ask for a change and you put honest, decent reasoning for whatever you are doing, you're not small. You're not small in the in society for things that doesn't belong to us. It's for the bishop, let's be for the bishop. But I just don't want people to go thinking that they are getting.
You're reading a lot of things into my answers that I didn't say.
I don't want it to be
Okay.
taken the way it's seen.
Is
I just want
that, is that how you guys took it? That I
I just
said
want to
you're
make
not
sure that
supposed to
you are
ask
not- you're
questions
not
and you're
small
not
guys.
supposed to. Well, I'm glad that you have an advocate here who wants you to become active in the church and to speak up. I think that's important. We have to know when. As with everything in Orthodoxy, when is something up to us? It is always up to us to talk to the priest, talk to the bishop. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not up to us to decide it's time to intercommune. Then we're crossing over the line. But thank you for that. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mina and Elizabeth, for this opportunity. And my pleasure.
I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. This was so special, and I just felt like this was such a rich conversation, and I think this is like the most we've had at our Pan-Orthodox youth meeting, so thank you guys for showing up. If you want to be in the group chat, let me know. Yeah, we have some food. We might just have to warm it up quickly. Mira, do you know where?
It's going in the hall, dining hall, though.
The dining hall, so the big hall in the back through the corridor, to the left, to the right. We'll find it. But thank you guys so much for coming out. God bless you. Thank you so much. And come join us for something to eat. Oh, yes. Tomorrow at the Greek church, Dr. Jeannie will be hosting a presentation, a little more formal. She has a topic. And it's about this kind of thing. So if you want a deeper understanding, please come. Alyssa and Cam here have all the information. They're kind of running it. They got it all. They know. So come see them if you would like some more info. Mike.